In 2016, a 9,200 square foot mansion sitting on an 18,000 square foot plot on Victoria Peak sold for 2.1 billion Hong Kong dollars. That's 256 million US dollars. It was a trophy asset in the most expensive real estate market on the planet. Today, creditors are seizing those exact assets. Receivers shopped the property with estimates plunging to $128 million, a catastrophic discount of roughly 50%. This is not an isolated foreclosure. By late 2024, real residential property prices in Hong Kong had slid roughly 20 to 25% from their 2021 peak. Commercial real estate is bleeding too, with citywide Grade A vacancy rates hitting a record 16.4%, while the premium central business district hovered near 14%. Millions of square feet of glass and steel built for global banks now sit completely empty. While foreign direct investment inflows hovered at $112.6 billion US dollars in 2023, allowing Hong Kong to temporarily maintain its rank as the fourth largest FDI recipient globally, the institutional shift was undeniable. Hedge funds, private equity firms, and wealth offices began quietly packing up and shifting their assets away from the Pearl River Delta. For 150 years, a mountainous spit of land with zero natural resources operated as the ultimate financial conduit between East and West. It survived the collapse of empires, world wars, and communist revolutions. It was an anomaly, a libertarian utopia engineered purely for the frictionless generation of wealth. Now, that system is being systematically dismantled. The statistics are being rewritten. The legal firewalls are demolished. By the early 19th century, the British Empire had a math problem. British citizens consumed 30 million pounds of Chinese tea annually, but the Qing dynasty demanded payment exclusively in silver bullion, trapping foreign commerce in a heavily taxed bottleneck. The resulting trade imbalance drained the British currency. The British East India Company needed a highly lucrative alternative to reverse the flow. They found it in India: opium. They orchestrated a shadow economy, mass-producing opium in India and sailing it across the South China Sea. Chinese smugglers bought the opium with silver, which the British used to buy tea. The silver reversed direction. The financial pivot was violent. The price of silver skyrocketed, financially ruining the working class and paralyzing the population with a nationwide addiction crisis. When Chinese authorities fought back in 1839 by confiscating and destroying over 20,000 chests of British opium, the British Parliament deployed the Royal Navy. Sailing alongside them was the world's first ocean-going iron warship, privately commissioned and owned by the British East India Company. Armed with this technological supremacy, the British decimated the wooden Qing fleets. Defeated Qing officials signed a treaty that demanded 21 million silver dollars in reparations and ceded a barren deepwater harbor to the British Crown. Britain had secured Hong Kong Island. Over the next 50 years, foreign powers relentlessly expanded their footprint. Following the Second Opium War and the First Sino-Japanese War, Britain extracted a 99-year lease on the mainland New Territories in 1898. It expanded the colony's size nearly tenfold, gave them a critical buffer zone, and established a hard expiration date on British rule. Control consolidated around a cartel of foreign trading houses that monopolized the shipment of tea, silk, and opium. But global commerce required multi-currency trade networks, and the colonial infrastructure had a fatal flaw. Merchant houses were acting as informal banks. Physical silver bullion was slow and dangerous to move. The colony needed a localized financial engine. In 1865, they built one: the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, HSBC. HSBC achieved absolute dominance over the regional financial system. It operated as the central nervous system of the British Empire in Asia, embedding itself directly into state machinery. It wielded the extraordinary power of currency creation, acting as a de facto central bank. Today, HSBC still issues over 50% of all Hong Kong dollar banknotes in circulation. Combining the logistical supremacy of trading cartels with the infinite liquidity of HSBC, Britain engineered an autonomous economic fortress. It was entirely isolated from the chaos of the declining Qing dynasty and completely devoid of regulatory oversight from London. It was a jurisdiction built by capital for capital. The modern economic identity of Hong Kong crystallized after the Second World War. The Japanese military occupation had decimated the local economy, crashing the population to just 600,000. But the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949 sent hundreds of thousands of refugees flooding across the Shenzhen River. The population surged past 2.2 million by 1950. Meanwhile, a United Nations embargo on China during the Korean War wiped out Hong Kong's traditional shipping trade. The territory pivoted to light manufacturing. A sudden influx of highly motivated, cheap labor provided the raw material for rapid industrialization. But the true catalyst for the territory's explosive growth emerged from the radical philosophy of its colonial bureaucrats. While policymakers in post-war London embraced Keynesian interventionism, building a sprawling welfare state and maintaining high taxes, administrators in Hong Kong aggressively rejected it. The architect of this divergence was a British civil servant named Sir John Cowperthwaite. Ascending to the role of financial secretary in 1961, Cowperthwaite maintained an absolute conviction that central authorities hinder the natural efficiency of the free market. Cowperthwaite implemented a strict policy against macroeconomic forecasting. While the government did establish a census and statistics department to track basic demographics, he explicitly forbade the calculation of GDP or aggregate economic statistics. He operated under the assumption that the mere existence of this data would inevitably tempt politicians to meddle with the economy. When American economist Milton Friedman visited in 1963, he asked Cowperthwaite for the numbers. Cowperthwaite replied, "If I let them compute those statistics, they'll want to use them for planning." The resulting economic framework represented the purest implementation of laissez-faire capitalism in the modern world. The colonial government adhered to a strictly balanced budget, mandated unilateral free trade, and blocked all labor market regulations. There was no minimum wage. The tax code was engineered purely to subsidize foreign investment. For decades, personal income tax faced a legendary hard cap at 15%, a ceiling that held until the government was forced to break it in 2024 to plug their exploding deficits, while corporate profits maxed out at 16.5%. The state levied zero taxes on sales, zero on capital gains, zero on dividends, and charged absolutely no tariffs on imports. Overall, government spending consumed a mere 19% of the territory's GDP, less than half of what Western democracies were spending at the time. How did the government pay for infrastructure without taxes? Land. The British Crown held a total monopoly on land supply. Today, 75% of the city's entire surface remains completely empty, untouched jungle occupied by wild boars and macaques. The government artificially restricts the supply of land to inflate prices. They generate public revenue by releasing tiny parcels of land to private developers at public auction for 50-year and 99-year leases. In recent years, the government regularly released just a fraction of a percent of the total landmass to the private market. These land premiums functioned as an indirect tax, often generating over 30% of total government revenue. Cowperthwaite's successors formalized this doctrine. Land revenue could only be used to build physical infrastructure, like container terminals and reservoirs. The administration flatly refused to fund social welfare and healthcare using volatile one-off land sales. This led to the rail plus property model. The government granted the Mass Transit Railway Corporation exclusive land development rights above new stations. The MTR built the rail lines, then partnered with developers to build luxury shopping malls and 50-story apartment towers directly on top of them. The real estate profits subsidized the train tickets. It made Hong Kong public transit dirt cheap and insanely profitable. But the system entrenched a powerful real estate oligopoly. The system kept direct taxes at zero for the global elite, while forcing the local population to pay the world's highest housing costs. A basic 400 square foot apartment easily costs $1 million US. A single parking space can cost $167,000. The median living space shrank to just over 172 square feet per person. The burden of survival fell entirely on the individual, while the rewards of capital accumulated at the absolute top. The strategy yielded unprecedented financial results. Between 1960 and 1996, per capita income exploded. By the time of the 1997 handover, the per capita income of Hong Kong residents had completely eclipsed that of the British Isles. A barren rock had surpassed the wealth of the empire that conquered it. Milton Friedman elevated the city-state into a devotional object for the global neoliberal movement, declaring on national television, "If you want to see capitalism in action, if you want to see the free market really working, this is the place to go." But the expiration date on the ultimate capitalist experiment was set in stone. The 99-year lease on the new territories represented 86% of Hong Kong's total landmass. Rent was zero. The expiration date was July 1st, 1997. By the 1980s, nearly all of Hong Kong's power generation, alongside its critical reservoirs and airport infrastructure, were located in the new territories. The island could not be cleanly severed. When British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher traveled to Beijing in 1982 to negotiate an extension, Chinese paramount leader Deng Xiaoping flatly rejected her. He threatened to take the territory by military force in a single afternoon if she refused to surrender. Leaving the Great Hall of the People, Thatcher stumbled and fell on the stairs. The image symbolized the definitive end of British dominance in Asia. In December 1984, the Sino-British Joint Declaration was signed in Beijing. Hong Kong would return to Chinese sovereignty as a special administrative region. To pacify terrified financial markets and prevent a catastrophic exodus of global capital, the Chinese Communist Party agreed to a doctrine known as one country, two systems. The Basic Law became the territory's de facto constitution, legally binding Beijing to preserve Hong Kong's capitalist system and independent judiciary until 2047. It guaranteed the protection of private property and mandated independent finances, meaning Beijing could not extract a single cent in taxes. It preserved the low-tax framework and ensured the Hong Kong dollar remained pegged directly to the US dollar. Hong Kong would exist inside the PRC geographically, but outside it economically. On June 30th, 1997, amid heavy monsoon rains, sovereignty transferred. At exactly midnight, the Chinese national anthem played in the handover ceremony. And 6 hours later, at dawn on July 1st, 4,000 troops of the People's Liberation Army crossed the Shenzhen River, stamping Beijing's military authority on the territory. The British Empire had officially surrendered the global financial hub to the world's largest communist party. The economic firewall held for exactly 23 years. It operated as an autonomous capitalist bridge between the Chinese mainland and global markets. Beijing's economic reforms minted over 800 new billionaires, but that wealth was extremely anxious. The state let people get rich, but offered no guarantee they could stay rich. Entire industries could vanish overnight, and executives could disappear for crossing the government. To protect their assets from state seizure, Chinese elites needed a safe offshore haven. They looked at Hong Kong. It offered the rule of law, it offered free and independent judges, it respected private property and had incredibly low taxes. Chinese elites secured their wealth, and Hong Kong got insanely rich off land sales. But this system was fragile. Hong Kong was caught in a strange political limbo. It had freedom without democracy. The government was never directly accountable to the public. Beijing effectively appointed the chief executive through an election committee where registered banks and airline catering companies got votes, but everyday people did not. If voters could pressure representatives to solve the housing crisis, land values would collapse and the entire revenue system would implode. This underlying political friction hit a breaking point in 2019. When the pro-Beijing government proposed a bill allowing extradition to the mainland, the public saw the reality. Any brush with the law could mean disappearing into the mainland Chinese penal system. Organizers estimated 2 million residents marched in the streets. They paralyzed the city for nearly a year, fundamentally challenging Beijing's absolute political authority. The response shattered the illusion of autonomy forever. While the world was distracted by the pandemic, Beijing reacted. On June 30th, 2020, on the exact eve of the Handover's 23rd anniversary, the Chinese Communist Party bypassed the local legislature entirely. Beijing drafted the national security law in absolute secrecy. Nobody in Hong Kong saw the text before President Xi Jinping signed it into law the same day. The NSL criminalized secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. The definitions were intentionally vague, carrying maximum sentences of life in prison. A second parallel court system emerged. Judges were hand-selected by the government. Trials were held in secret. Police no longer needed search warrants. Most critically, Article 38 of the NSL claimed global extraterritorial jurisdiction, stating that non-residents committing offenses outside of Hong Kong could be prosecuted upon setting foot in the territory. This terrified multinational risk compliance officers. The political purge rapidly evolved into an economic takeover. The dismantling of the independent legal structure terminated the territory's value as a safe, predictable hub for global capital. The local legislature purged all democratic opposition. In March 2024, they passed domestic legislation targeting espionage, external interference, and the theft of state secrets. Routine commercial operations became criminal liabilities. Multinational firms conducting standard due diligence or supply chain research suddenly faced investigation by the Ministry of State Security for conducting intelligence work. The security apparatus only continued to tighten. Under new implementation rules enacted in March 2026, refusing to provide decryption passwords to local police became a criminal offense carrying up to a year in prison, a mandate applying even to transiting corporate executives checking emails at the airport. The unique commercial legal framework evaporated. Global capital requires legal certainty. Without it, the money leaves. Multinational enterprises diverted assets out of the territory, and Singapore immediately captured the outflow. Between 2019 and 2023, the number of single-family wealth offices in Singapore surged from 400 to over 1,400. Hedge funds and private equity firms quietly moved their footprints 1,600 miles south, securing the exact same English common law foundation without the unpredictable reach of the Chinese intelligence apparatus. Regional headquarters vanished. FedEx moved its Asia headquarters to Singapore. The New York Times evacuated its digital news hub and a third of its staff to Seoul. LVMH relocated the regional operations of several core brands to Shanghai. The number of American businesses with regional headquarters in Hong Kong plummeted to its lowest count since the year 2000. The stock market priced in the initial shock. In early 2024, the Hang Seng Index crashed below the 15,000-point threshold, dropping temporarily lower than its value on the exact day of the 1997 handover. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange dried up so fast that it was briefly knocked completely out of the global top 10 for new listings. However, this was a transition, not a grave. Subsidized heavily by state-backed mainland funds, the market soared back. The HKEX experienced a massive surge in IPOs in 2025, and the Hang Seng recovered past 25,000 by 2026. But the market composition had undergone a total metamorphosis. British conglomerates and global capital retreated, and mainland capital swallowed the exchange. By the end of 2024, mainland Chinese companies generated over 80% of the daily trading volume and market capitalization. The market ceased functioning as a purely independent global entity. It had become an offshore fundraising arm for the People's Republic. The physical real estate buckled. With expatriates and global capital fleeing, the premium commercial towers of Central emptied out. The luxury sector collapsed, resulting in creditors seizing the trophy assets of Victoria Peak at massive discounts. The property crash destroyed the structural foundation of the colonial economic model. The Hong Kong government still relied on the 19th century strategy of funding its budget through land lease sales. With transaction volumes collapsing, the government collected just 19.4 billion Hong Kong dollars in land premium revenue, a fraction of the 85 billion they had projected. This fiscal crisis ultimately generated a massive 101.6 billion Hong Kong dollar deficit for the financial year. The administration burned through its historic financial reserves, dropping from 1.17 trillion Hong Kong dollars in 2018 to just over 700 billion by 2024. The positive non-interventionist machine required skyrocketing land values and infinite foreign capital to run. It ground to a violent halt. Hong Kong was built purely for the generation of capital. It was born from a narcotics war and operated for 150 years, shielded from ideology. The assumption that global financial integration would force the Chinese Communist Party to respect the territory's autonomy proved to be a fatal miscalculation. Faced with a choice between maintaining the world's most dynamic capitalist bridge and enforcing absolute political obedience, Beijing chose obedience. The legal firewalls have been demolished. The statistics have been rewritten. The ultimate libertarian experiment has been erased from the map.